The Montana wind howled through the dusty train depot as Caden stood abandoned, her wealthy mail-order fiancé having just laughed in her face and walked away. Penniless and stranded, she braced for ruin. Then, a massive shadow fell over her, and a voice like grinding stone whispered, "My twins need a mother like you." The Union Pacific locomotive hissed violently, expelling a thick cloud of white steam that rolled across the wooden planks of the Bitter Creek Station platform. It was September of 1887, and the Wyoming Territory was a harsh, unforgiving expanse of sagebrush and jagged horizons. Caden Hayes stepped down from the passenger car, her knees trembling beneath the heavy wool of her traveling skirt. She clutched a worn leather valise in one hand, and a parasol she had no use for in the other. At 24, Caden was not a woman who believed in fairy tales, but she had believed in the letters of Arthur Pendleton. Back in Boston, after the sudden death of her father left her drowning in a sea of creditors, Arthur's letters had been a lifeline. He wrote of a sprawling cattle ranch, of a grand Victorian home being built at the edge of town, and of a desperate need for a refined, educated wife to help him manage his expanding empire. He had paid for her ticket. He had promised her security. Caden scanned the platform. The local townsfolk paid her little mind, bustling past with sacks of flour and hardware supplies. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The train blew its whistle and chugged away, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. Caden sat on her trunk, the harsh western sun beating down on her face, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes and the pale exhaustion of a 7-day journey. Finally, a polished black buggy pulled up to the station. A man stepped out, his boots gleaming despite the dusty streets. He wore a tailored suit and a silver-banded Stetson. Arthur Pendleton. Caden recognized him from the miniature portrait he had mailed her, though the portrait had hidden the hard, calculating lines around his mouth. Caden stood, smoothing her wrinkled skirt, a hopeful, nervous smile touching her lips. "Mr. Pendleton? I am Caden. Caden Hayes." Arthur stopped a few feet away. His eyes, a cold, piercing blue, swept over her from the top of her slightly askew bonnet to the scuffed toes of her boots. He did not smile. He did not reach for her luggage. Instead, a look of profound disappointment, followed quickly by disgust, settled over his features. "You're Caden?" he asked, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. It carried across the quiet platform, drawing the attention of the station master and a few lingering cowboys. "I am," Caden said, her smile faltering. "The journey was quite arduous, and I apologize for my appearance." "Your appearance is the least of it," Arthur interrupted, taking a step back as if her poverty might be contagious. He pulled a crumpled photograph from his breast pocket, the photograph she had sent him. "This woman is vibrant. She has meat on her bones. You look like a strong wind would blow you clear back to Massachusetts. I asked for a woman capable of running a grand household, hosting dignitaries, and bearing strong children." Caden felt the blood drain from her face. "Mr. Pendleton, please. I am stronger than I look." "The train ride. The deal is off," Arthur said loudly, making sure the onlookers heard him. He was performing, Caden realized with a sickening jolt. He was saving face before the town. "I paid for a thoroughbred. Miss Hayes, not a broken-down mare. I will not have the town laughing at me, saying Arthur Pendleton imported a sickly spinster." "Arthur, you cannot do this," Caden whispered, stepping forward, the humiliation burning in her throat. "I have no money. I sold everything to pay the debts my father left. I have $2 to my name. Where am I to go?" Arthur pulled a gold pocket watch from his vest, checked the time, and snapped it shut. "That sounds entirely like a problem of your own making, Mr. Abernathy," he called out to the station master. "This woman is not my responsibility. See that she doesn't loiter." With that, Arthur turned on his heel, climbed back into his buggy, and cracked the whip. The horses surged forward, kicking up a cloud of dust that washed over Caden, coating her dark dress in a fine layer of grit. She stood frozen as the buggy disappeared down the main street. The whispers began immediately. The women on the boardwalk shielded their mouths, their eyes darting toward the abandoned Easterner, while the men simply shook their heads. Caden sank slowly back onto her trunk. The sheer magnitude of her disaster crashed over her. She was 3,000 miles from a home that no longer existed, entirely alone in a town that had just watched her be discarded like spoiled goods. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the burning tears that threatened to spill over. She would not cry. Not here. Not where Arthur Pendleton's sycophants could see her break. But as the afternoon sun began to dip lower, casting long, menacing shadows across the Wyoming dirt, the cold reality of the coming night set in. She had no shelter, no food, and no protector. He ain't worth the water it'd take to drown him. The voice was a deep, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate through the wooden planks beneath Caden's feet. She gasped, her eyes flying open. A man was standing beside her trunk. He was massive, easily 6'3", with shoulders that blocked out the late afternoon sun. He wore a heavy buckskin coat lined with sheepskin, worn denim trousers, and scuffed leather boots that spoke of miles walked on rough terrain. Under a battered, wide-brimmed felt hat, his hair was dark and shaggy, grazing his collar. But it was his eyes that caught Caden's breath. They were a striking, mossy green, deeply set in a face that was all sharp angles, weathered skin, and a jagged scar that ran from his left cheekbone down to his jawline. He smelled of pine pitch, wood smoke, and a profound, untamed wildness. Caden immediately pulled her valise closer to her chest. "Excuse me?" The man didn't move. He simply looked down at the direction Arthur's buggy had gone, his jaw tightening. "Arthur Pendleton is a snake in a tailor's suit. You're lucky he showed his fangs today, rather than a year from now. That is easy for you to say." "Sir," Caden retorted, a defensive flash of anger cutting through her despair. "You are not the one sitting on a trunk in a strange town with nowhere to go." The mountain man shifted his gaze back to her. His look was intensely analytical, stripping away her dusty clothes and tired posture, searching for something deeper. He noted the way she held her chin up, despite the redness in her eyes. He noted the calluses on her hands, the kind that came from hard work, not parlor games. "Name's Crystal," he said abruptly. "Crystal Montgomery." Caden blinked, unsure how to handle this towering stranger. "Caden Hayes. And while I appreciate the sentiment, Mr. Montgomery, I am in no mood for idle conversation. I need to find a telegraph office and figure out how to." She trailed off. "Figure out what? Beg for money from relatives who had already turned their backs on her?" Crystal took a step closer. The shadow he cast enveloped her entirely, yet strangely, it felt less like a threat and more like a shield against the glaring, judgmental eyes of the town. He leaned down slightly. "I watched how you handled yourself just now," Crystal murmured, his voice dropping to a low pitch meant only for her. "You didn't scream. You didn't faint. You stood your ground. You've got grit, Caden Hayes." "Grit does not buy a train ticket back east," she replied bitterly. "No," Crystal agreed, "but it survives the mountain." He paused, his green eyes locked onto hers with a startling intensity. "I live 4 hours up the pass, in the Bitterroot timber. I have a cabin, a good logging claim, and I have a boy and a girl, Wyatt and Josie. They just turned 5. Caden frowned, utterly confused by the turn in the conversation. "Congratulations." Crystal ignored the sarcasm. His expression hardened, revealing a deep, welling exhaustion. "My wife passed away 3 years ago. The mountain took her. Since then, it's just been me and the children. I can hunt. I can chop wood. I can fight off a grizzly, but I can't raise a little girl to be a lady, and I can't teach a boy to read his letters. They are running wild as coyotes, and winter is coming. They need a mother." He stepped even closer, his voice dropping to a raw whisper. "My twins need a mother like you." Caden stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. Are you proposing marriage to me, Mr. Montgomery? You do not know me. I do not know you. I know you're desperate, and I know I am," Crystal said bluntly, stripping away any pretense of romance. "I ain't offering you a Victorian mansion like Pendleton did. It's a cabin. It's hard work. It's chopping firewood, mending clothes, and dealing with isolation that can make a person go mad if they don't have a strong mind. But I don't drink. I don't hit women. I will provide for you, and I will never leave you sitting on a train platform for the town to laugh at. Caden looked at his calloused, massive hands, then up at his scarred face. It was a terrifying proposition. To go into the deep wilderness with a giant of a man she had met exactly 3 minutes ago. But what was her alternative? Prostitution in a frontier town? Starvation? A marriage of convenience, Caden said, her voice shaking only slightly. A partnership, Crystal corrected. You care for my children and my home. I keep a roof over your head and food in your belly. Caden looked out at the dusty, merciless town of Bitter Creek. She thought of Arthur Pendleton's cruel laugh. Then she took a deep breath, drawing the thin western air into her lungs, and looked Crystal Montgomery dead in the eye. "Where is the justice of the peace?" she asked. A flicker of surprise, followed rapidly by deep respect, passed through Crystal's eyes. He reached down and effortlessly hoisted her heavy leather trunk onto his shoulder as if it weighed no more than a sack of feathers. "Follow me." An hour later, Caden was legally bound to Crystal Montgomery. The ceremony in Judge Harrison's back office was brief, devoid of flowers, music, or smiles. Caden signed the registry with a steady hand, dropping the name Hayes and taking up a name that felt as heavy as the man standing beside her. They loaded her trunk into the back of a sturdy wooden wagon hitched to 2 massive draft horses. Crystal helped her up to the bench. His touch was firm but surprisingly gentle. As they rode out of Bitter Creek, the townsfolk stared once more. They had watched Caden be discarded by the town's richest man, only to be claimed by the mountain's most reclusive ghost. The journey up the pass was grueling. As the wagon left the flatlands, the elevation climbed sharply. The dusty sagebrush gave way to dense, towering pine trees that blocked out the dying sun. The air grew rapidly colder, biting through Caden's thin wool coat. She shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. Without a word, Crystal reached behind the seat, pulled out a thick, heavy buffalo robe, and draped it over her shoulders. The thick fur smelled intensely of him leather, sweat, and pine, but it was gloriously warm. "Thank you," she whispered. "We're almost to the property line," Crystal replied, his eyes scanning the darkening woods with a predator's vigilance. It was nearly pitch black when the wagon finally lumbered into a clearing. Caden could just make out the silhouette of a large, sturdy log cabin with smoke curling lazily from a stone chimney. As the wagon rolled to a stop, the heavy oak door of the cabin swung open. Silhouetted in the warm orange glow of the hearth stood 2 small figures. Crystal climbed down and reached up to help Caden. "Wyatt. Josie. Come out here." The 2 children cautiously stepped onto the porch. Caden's breath caught. They were incredibly small, dressed in oversized, roughly patched flannels. Wyatt had a mop of dark hair and a fierce, protective scowl that mirrored his father's. Josie was hiding behind her brother, her blonde hair a tangled, unbrushed bird's nest. They looked less like children and more like cornered, feral animals. "This is Caden," Crystal said, his deep voice carrying through the cold night air. "She's your new mother." Wyatt glared at Caden, his small fists clenched at his sides. "She ain't our mother," the 5-year-old spat. "Our mother is dead, and Mr. Pendleton says it's your fault." Caden froze, the buffalo robe slipping slightly from her shoulders. She whipped her head to look at Crystal. The mountain man's face had turned to stone. His jaw locked so tightly, Caden thought his teeth might shatter. The air in the clearing suddenly felt suffocatingly heavy. Arthur Pendleton. Why was a 5-year-old child isolated on a mountain quoting the man who had just ruined Caden's life? Crystal didn't answer the boy. He simply grabbed Caden's trunk from the back of the wagon and marched past the children into the cabin. Caden stood alone in the dark, the cold wind whipping her hair, staring at the 2 hostile children. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had not just walked into a marriage of convenience. She had walked directly into the center of a blood feud. And she was locked on top of a mountain with a man who, according to the man she was supposed to marry, had killed his first wife. The cabin was a fortress of heavy, hand-hewn logs, but inside it was a tomb of neglect. A single oil lamp cast a flickering, jaundiced light over the scarred plank floor, a massive stone hearth filled with cold ash, and a rough-hewn oak table covered in unwashed tin plates. Caden stood near the door, her breath pluming in the frigid air, still clutching the buffalo robe around her shoulders. Crystal had said nothing after Wyatt's accusation. He simply stoked the fire, his broad back to her, the muscles of his shoulders rigid beneath his flannel shirt. He pointed to a small alcove sectioned off by a faded quilt hanging from a rope. "Your bed is in there. The twins sleep up in the loft. I take the floor by the fire." "Mr. Montgomery," Caden started, her voice trembling slightly. Not from the cold, but from the adrenaline still surging through her veins. "We need to discuss what your son just said." Crystal turned. The firelight caught the jagged scar on his cheek, making it look like a fresh wound. "No, we don't. It's a lie spun by a snake to poison a child's mind. That's all you need to know." The use of his first name hung in the air between them. The twins, peering over the edge of the wooden loft ladder, watched with wide, silent eyes. They were waiting for their father's explosive anger. Instead, Crystal deflated. The imposing mountain man seemed to age 10 years in a single sigh. He walked over to the table, pulling out a heavy wooden chair, and gestured for her to sit. Reluctantly, Caden did. "Arthur Pendleton wants this mountain," Crystal began, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that barely carried over the crackle of the newly lit fire. "Specifically, he wants the water rights to Blackwood Creek, which originates on my claim. 3 years ago, he tried to buy me out, offered pennies on the dollar. I told him to go to hell." Crystal leaned forward, resting his massive forearms on his knees, staring into the flames. That winter was the worst the territory had seen in a decade. "My wife, Sarah, came down with a severe fever. The sickness settled deep in her lungs. I couldn't leave her and the babies, so I sent my neighbor, Old Man Higgins, down the mountain to fetch Dr. Eris. But when Higgins got to Bitter Creek, Pendleton had the doctor under lock and key at his hotel, claimed his prize quarter horse was ailing, and he was paying the doctor triple to tend to the beast. Pendleton told the doctor the pass was snowed in anyway, that it was a fool's errand to try and reach us." Caden gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "He kept a doctor from a dying woman for a horse?" "Pendleton knew exactly what he was doing," Crystal growled, his green eyes flashing with a dangerous, untamed sorrow. "He figured if he broke me, if he let the mountain take my family, I'd sell the claim for the price of a train ticket out of here. By the time I strapped on snowshoes and carried Sarah down the mountain myself, it was too late. She drowned in her own lungs in the back of Higgins' wagon." Caden felt a tear slip hot and fast down her cheek. The sheer cruelty of it was beyond her comprehension, and the accusation that it was your fault? "When I came back down to Bitter Creek a month later for supplies, I nearly beat Pendleton to death in the middle of the street. It took 4 deputies to pull me off him," Crystal admitted, showing no remorse. "Ever since, Pendleton has spread a rumor that I beat Sarah, that I locked her out in the snow. He makes sure the townsfolk hate me, isolates me, hoping I'll starve out. Wyatt heard the whispers last time I took him to town to buy boots. Pendleton made sure of it." Caden looked up toward the loft. The 2 small faces quickly ducked out of sight. Her heart shattered for the man sitting in front of her, and for the feral, heartbroken children hiding in the shadows. Arthur Pendleton had not just humiliated her. He was a monster, actively destroying a family. "Tomorrow," Caden said, her voice dropping its trembling completely, replacing it with a steely, undeniable resolve. "I need flour, baking soda, whatever salt pork you have, and a comb. If I am to be the mother in this house, these children will not look like orphans another day." Crystal looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the fire in her dark eyes, the set of her jaw. The delicate Easterner Arthur Pendleton had discarded was an illusion. Beneath the dusty silk and crushed velvet was a foundation of pure iron. "I'll chop the wood," Crystal murmured, a ghost of respect softening his harsh features. Over the next month, the cabin transformed. Caden attacked the dirt and despair with a vengeance. It was grueling, bone-aching work. Her soft hands blistered and bled, forming tough calluses as she learned to split kindling, haul heavy buckets of water from the freezing creek, and scrub floors with lye soap. Winning over the children was a slower, more delicate battle. Josie broke first. 3 weeks into Caden's arrival, during a particularly violent thunderstorm, the little girl had crept down from the loft, terrified. Caden hadn't scolded her. Instead, she had wrapped Josie in a heavy quilt, sat her by the fire, and spent an hour carefully untangling the mats from her blonde hair, singing a soft, lilting lullaby her own mother had taught her. By morning, Josie was clinging to Caden's skirt. Wyatt was a harder nut to crack. He was fiercely loyal to his father and the memory of a mother he barely remembered. He defied Caden at every turn, refusing to eat the rabbit stews she painstakingly prepared, and stubbornly ignoring her attempts to teach him the alphabet using a slate board Crystal had carved. The breakthrough came unexpectedly in late October. Caden was out back, struggling to hang heavy wet laundry on a line strung between 2 pines, when a large timber rattlesnake, sluggish but deadly from the cooling weather, slithered onto the woodpile Wyatt was playing near. Wyatt froze, his eyes wide with terror as the snake coiled, its tail emitting a dry, terrifying buzz. Caden didn't think. She dropped the heavy wet sheet, grabbed a heavy iron fireplace poker she had been using to stir the boiling washpot, and lunged. With a fierce, guttural shout that surprised even her, she brought the iron down on the snake, crushing it instantly. She stood over the dead reptile, chest heaving, her hands shaking violently. Wyatt stared at her, then down at the snake. Slowly, the boy walked over and wrapped his arms tightly around Caden's waist, burying his face in her apron. Caden dropped the poker and sank to her knees, holding the boy close, burying her face in his dark hair. "I've got you," she whispered fiercely. "I've got you, Wyatt. I will always protect you." From the edge of the tree line, an axe resting on his massive shoulder, Crystal watched. The tight, agonizing knot that had sat in his chest for 3 years slowly began to loosen. For the first time since Sarah died, the cabin felt like a home. But down in the valley, Arthur Pendleton was growing impatient. Winter swept across the Wyoming territory with brutal speed. By mid-November, the snow was waist-deep, sealing the Montgomery cabin high in the Bitterroot Mountains beneath a heavy white silence. Yet inside that isolation, an unexpected warmth had begun to grow. What had started as a marriage of necessity slowly deepened into something far more powerful. In the evenings, once Wyatt and Josie were asleep in the loft, Caden and Crystal would sit beside the fire. Caden read from the Warren Dickens novels she had brought from Boston, while Crystal repaired harnesses or carved small wooden toys for the children. At first, their quiet companionship had been cautious, but over time it softened into something intimate. Crystal began to notice everything about her: the copper glow in her hair when the firelight struck it, the gentle curve of her neck as she read aloud, and the fierce tenderness she showed his children. Caden, in turn, discovered that beneath Crystal's scars and rough exterior lived a man of quiet intelligence and unwavering loyalty. One night, while Crystal carefully bandaged a splintered cut on Caden's hand, his fingers lingered. "You've worked yourself to the bone for us," he murmured. "For our family," Caden corrected softly. Crystal's eyes darkened. Slowly, he leaned forward. The kiss that followed was anything but hesitant. It was deep and fierce, filled with months of restrained longing. Caden clutched his shirt, answering him with equal passion. For the first time in years, Crystal Montgomery felt something long buried inside him come back to life. But their fragile peace shattered 3 days before Christmas. A thunderous pounding rattled the cabin door at dawn. Crystal was instantly awake, grabbing the Winchester rifle beside the bed. Caden hurried into her wool dress and stepped protectively between the door and the ladder to the loft, where the twins peered down, frightened. Crystal threw open the door. Arthur Pendleton stood on the porch, wrapped in a fur coat and flanked by 3 armed men. His smile carried the smug confidence of a man certain of victory. "Morning, Montgomery," Arthur said lightly. His gaze slid to Caden. "And Miss Hayes. Quite the fall from Boston parlors to a mountain shack." "It's Mrs. Montgomery," Caden replied sharply. Crystal raised the rifle. "You have 10 seconds to leave my land." Arthur simply produced a folded parchment. "A foreclosure notice," he said. "Caden's late father owed money to a Boston banker. Those debts passed to his heir, and when she married you, they became yours. I purchased that debt. Since you can't pay the $3,000 owed, this land now belongs to me." The words struck Caden like a blow. Her father's debts, she had thought they were behind her. Crystal cocked the rifle with a metallic snap. "You lying snake," he growled. The hired guns instantly raised their pistols. "Crystal, don't," Caden cried. "If you shoot him, they'll hang you." Arthur smirked. "Listen to your bride. Pack what you can carry. I'll burn this place down once you're gone." "You won't burn anything." The new voice came from the tree line. A lone rider emerged from the snow-covered pines, mounted on a massive gray stallion. A silver star gleamed on his chest. U.S. Marshal Caleb Reeves. Arthur's smug confidence vanished. "Marshal, what are you doing here?" "Investigating fraud," Reeves replied calmly. "Dismounting." He held up a telegram. "Got word from a Boston attorney. Turns out, Elias Cornwall never sold Caden's debt to you. In fact, the Higgins estate cleared those debts weeks ago." He nodded toward the paper in Arthur's hand. "That document is a forgery." Arthur's face drained of color. "Fraud. Attempted land theft," Reeves continued coldly. "And that's just the start." Realizing the situation had changed, the hired guns quickly dropped their pistols into the snow. Crystal stepped forward, grabbing Arthur by the front of his expensive coat and lifting him off the ground. "If you ever set foot near my mountain again," he whispered, "the law won't be the one stopping me." He threw Arthur into the snow. Within the hour, Marshal Reeves rode down the mountain with Arthur and his men in chains. Silence returned to the clearing. Inside the cabin, Crystal bolted the heavy door and turned toward Caden. She stood trembling, tears running down her face. Without a word, he pulled her into his arms. "You saved us," he murmured against her hair. Caden held him tightly. "I told you, Crystal. I protect my family." From the loft, Wyatt and Josie scrambled down and wrapped their arms around them. Crystal dropped to his knees, pulling the children close until the four of them formed a tight embrace. Outside, the winter wind howled against the logs, but inside the cabin, the fire burned bright, warm, steady, and unbreakable. Caden Montgomery never received the Victorian mansion Arthur Pendleton promised, but she found something far more enduring in the unforgiving Wyoming timber. Through grit, fierce loyalty, and an unexpected love, she transformed a fractured cabin into an unbreakable home. Crystal and Caden built a legacy on Bitterroot Mountain, proving that the most profound bonds are not purchased with gold, but forged in the fires of survival and unwavering devotion.